Blood usually follows a mistake in my line of work. Spilling vintage red wine across the chest of the city's most ruthless mobster was practically a signed death warrant. My heart stopped as his massive hands gripped my collar. But what he did next completely shattered my entire reality. Working at the apex was never about the glamour. It was strictly about survival. Hidden beneath the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, the underground casino catered to the elite, the corrupt, and the incredibly dangerous. I, Oliver Hayes, was just a faceless waiter in a crisp black vest, pouring liquid gold for men who could buy and sell human lives before their morning coffee. More importantly, I was a ghost. In a society where secondary genetics dictated your destiny, being an Omega in the criminal underworld was a curse. Omegas were commodities, trophies to be caged or traded by powerful alphas. To avoid that fate, I spent a third of my meager paycheck on black market synthetic neutralizers. They were brutal pills that ravaged my immune system, but they effectively masked my sweet identifying pheromones, rendering me utterly undetectable. To the world and to the monsters sitting at the high-stakes tables, I was just another unremarkable beta. Tuesday nights were notoriously tense, but tonight the air was practically vibrating with suppressed violence. Dominic Rossi had just walked into the VIP lounge. At 32, Dominic was the undisputed head of the Rossi syndicate. He had taken over the family empire 3 years ago, after his father's violent assassination, purging his enemies with a ruthlessness that terrified even the seasoned cartel bosses. He was an alpha of terrifying proportions, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating an oppressive, suffocating aura of dominance that made the air feel thin. His tailored charcoal Brioni suit wrapped over a physique built for lethality, and his dark eyes held the cold, detached emptiness of a man who had forgotten how to feel anything but rage. My hands trembled slightly as the floor manager shoved a silver tray into them. Resting in the center was a freshly decanted bottle of 1990 Chateau Petrus, worth more than my life insurance policy. Table 4. The manager hissed, his forehead gleaming with nervous sweat. Do not make eye contact. Poor nod and get out. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I navigated the dimly lit lounge. The thick scent of expensive cigars, spilled whiskey, and aggressive alpha pheromones assaulted my senses, fighting against the chemical blockers in my bloodstream. I approached Dominic's table, where he sat surrounded by his heavily armed capos. Across from him sat an underboss from the rival Navarro cartel, a bloated alpha named Hector, who was currently losing heavily and sweating profusely. I moved with practiced precision, stepping up to Dominic's right side to pour the wine. I didn't look at his face. I stared strictly at the rim of the crystal glass. Then everything unraveled in a fraction of a second. Hector, infuriated by a terrible hand, slammed his massive fist onto the table and pushed his chair back violently. The heavy mahogany chair caught the back of my knee. My leg buckled. The silver tray tipped. Time seemed to drag to an agonizing gelatinous crawl as I watched the dark red liquid arc through the air. It hit Dominic's chest with a sickening splash, soaking through his pristine white silk shirt and staining his expensive suit jacket. The silence that fell over the VIP lounge was absolute. The background jazz music seemed to fade into nothingness. Hector stopped breathing. Dominic's capos instantly pushed their jackets back, their hands hovering over the grips of their concealed firearms. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline spike was so severe, so instantaneous, that I felt a sharp burning sensation at the base of my neck. My gland. The biological terror was burning right through my synthetic blockers. I fell to my knees, dropping the empty bottle, the glass shattering against the marble floor. I'm so sorry, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. please." Dominic slowly stood up. The sheer weight of his alpha presence hit the room like a physical shockwave. Several betas in the room visibly staggered back. He looked down at the ruined shirt, then his dark, unreadable eyes locked onto me. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for a weapon. The quietness of his fury was 1,000 times more terrifying. He reached down, his large, calloused hand gripping the front of my vest. With terrifying ease, he hauled me off the floor, lifting me until my toes barely brushed the marble. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact of a fist or the cold barrel of a gun against my forehead. I thought of my younger brother Benjamin, and who would take care of him when my body was found in the river, but the blow never came. Instead, Dominic froze. His grip on my vest tightened, pulling me an inch closer. Under the extreme duress, my compromised scent blockers fully gave way. For the first time in 5 years, the scent of rain-washed cedar and crushed vanilla bloomed from the gland at the crook of my neck, cutting through the cigar smoke like a beacon. I heard a sharp intake of breath. Dominic's head snapped down. Before my panicked brain could process what was happening, the most dangerous man in Chicago leaned forward and buried his face directly into the juncture of my neck and shoulder. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Hector dropped his cigar. The capo stared in stunned, paralyzed disbelief. Dominic inhaled deeply, his nose pressing firmly against my scent gland. A low, vibrating rumble erupted from deep within his chest, a primal, instinctual sound of profound relief. The oppressive, terrifying aura he had been projecting suddenly vanished, replaced by a heavy, protective warmth. His free hand came up, wrapping securely around the back of my head, holding me flush against his neck while he breathed me in, his chest rising and falling against mine. "Boss!" One of his men, a scarred alpha named Mateo, stepped forward tentatively. "Is it poison?" Dominic didn't answer. He didn't even look up. He just kept his face buried in my neck, inhaling my scent like a drowning man breaking the surface for oxygen. He stood there for a full minute, the Mafia kingpin cradling a terrified waiter in the middle of a frozen casino. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were different. The cold, empty abyss was gone, replaced by a dilated, possessive gold. He shrugged off his ruined suit jacket, and in a move that defied all logic, draped it heavily over my shoulders, engulfing me in his own intoxicating scent of sandalwood and gunpowder. "Clear the room," Dominic commanded, his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver straight down my spine. "And get the car. He's coming with me." The ride in the back of the armored Maybach was a masterclass in psychological torture. I sat pressed against the furthest door, clutching Dominic's ruined jacket around my shoulders like a shield. My mind was racing, trying to calculate the odds of diving out of a moving vehicle on the expressway and surviving. Next to me, Dominic sat in silence. He wasn't restraining me, but his eyes never left my face. His heavy gaze felt like a physical weight, tracing the lines of my panic. "What are you going to do to me?" I finally choked out, unable to bear the suffocating silence. "If it's about the wine, I can pay for it, I swear. Just take it out of my wages." Dominic let out a harsh, bitter chuckle. "You think I care about a cheap bottle of pitrous little Omega?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Omega. My deepest, darkest secret exposed in front of the entire underworld. "I'm not. Don't insult my intelligence," Dominic interrupted, smoothly shifting closer. The space between us evaporated. "Your blockers are cheap garbage. They failed the second your cortisol levels spiked. You smell like rain and cedar. It's—" He paused, his jaw clenching, as if fighting a physical battle internally. "It's deafening." The car glided to a halt inside a subterranean parking garage beneath the Four Seasons residences. Matteo opened the door and Dominic gestured for me to step out. I had no choice. I was surrounded by men armed with automatic weapons. I was escorted up a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, glittering view of the Chicago skyline, but to me, it was just a high-altitude prison. "Sit," Dominic ordered, pointing to a plush leather sofa. He walked over to a crystal decanter, pouring himself 2 fingers of amber liquid, downing it in one smooth motion. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the casino fading to reveal dark circles under his eyes. "Why am I here?" I demanded, finding a microscopic shred of courage. "If you know what I am, you know the laws. You can't just take me." "The laws?" Dominic scoffed, turning around to face me. "The laws don't apply to my family. But you aren't here as a plaything, Oliver." I froze. "You know my name. I know everything about you," Dominic said, walking slowly back toward the sofa. He sat on the heavy glass coffee table directly across from me, forcing me to look him in the eye. "I know you are 23. I know you dropped out of university to work double shifts. I know you buy Lupron-based blockers from a shady clinic in the South Side. And most importantly, I know why you need the money." He leaned in closer. "Benjamin." My blood ran entirely cold. "Don't you dare touch my brother." "I don't have to," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Benjamin owes $40,000 to the Navarro cartel. He got caught running bad numbers for their sports betting ring. Hector Navarro was at my table tonight to ask for my permission to make an example out of him in my territory." The room spun. Benjamin had told me he was working at an auto shop. I felt physically sick. The Navarros were butchers. They didn't just break legs, they disappeared people. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered, tears finally threatening to spill. "If he's dead, then." "He's not dead." "Not yet," Dominic corrected. "Because when your blockers failed tonight, you solved a very significant problem for me. In return, I am going to solve yours." Dominic leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair. The menacing Mafia boss suddenly looked remarkably human, almost vulnerable. "The Rossi bloodline carries a genetic defect," Dominic explained quietly. "A neurological condition linked to our alpha biology. It's called hyperreactive frenzy. Without getting into the medical jargon, my brain produces too much testosterone and cortisol. It makes us exceptional in a war, but it eventually destroys the mind. My father went completely insane before his rivals finally put a bullet in him. My grandfather died in a padded cell." I stared at him, trying to process the confession. The most feared man in the city was telling me his deepest vulnerability. "There is no medical cure." Dominic continued, his eyes locking onto my scent gland again. "The only recognized treatment is a biological anchor, an omega whose specific pheromone profile chemically neutralizes the alpha's receptors. It's a genetic lottery. I've had specialists testing profiles across the globe for 3 years. Nothing worked. My episodes have been getting worse. I was ready to tear Hector's throat out at that table tonight." He reached out his long fingers, gently brushing against my jawline. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. His touch was surprisingly warm. "And then you spilled a bottle of wine on me," Dominic murmured, stepping into my personal space again, inhaling deeply. "The second I caught your scent, the roaring in my head just stopped. It was like someone finally turned the volume down after a lifetime of static. You are a perfect genetic match, Oliver. You are my anchor." "So what?" I asked, my voice shaking. You're just going to lock me up here to be your personal air freshener." Dominic's eyes darkened, the gold flaring again. "I am going to keep you safe. Tomorrow morning, I am buying Benjamin's debt from the Navarros. I will set him up with a legitimate job, an apartment, and protection. He will never have to look over his shoulder again." And in exchange, I asked, though I already knew the answer, "In exchange, you belong to me." Dominic stated not as a threat, but as an undeniable fact. "You live here. You sleep here. You do not leave this compound without my security. And whenever the frenzy starts to take hold of me, you let me in." I looked around the lavish penthouse, the gilded cage. I thought of Benjamin, naive and terrified, facing the cartel's blades. I had spent my entire life running from alphas, chemically burning my own biology just to stay free. And now I was being forced to surrender to the apex predator of them all. "I need a phone," I said quietly, looking down at my hands. "I need to call my brother and tell him he's safe." A small triumphant smirk ghosted across Dominic's lips. He reached into his pocket and handed me a sleek, unlocked smartphone. "Welcome to the family, Oliver." I had saved my brother's life, but as I watched Dominic Rossi loosen his ruined tie, his eyes tracking my every movement with obsessive territorial hunger, I realized my own nightmare was just beginning. I wasn't just his biological medicine. I was stepping right into the crosshairs of a syndicate war. Because if Dominic's enemies found out that the invincible Rossi boss had finally found his only weakness, they wouldn't just come for him. They would come to slaughter his anchor. Living inside the Four Seasons penthouse was a bizarre juxtaposition of absolute luxury and terrifying captivity. Weeks bled into one another, forming a strange insular reality. My mornings consisted of tailoring sessions with exclusive seamstresses, bringing up Tom Ford slacks, Loro Piana, cashmere sweaters, and custom Italian leather shoes, while my nights were spent anticipating Dominic's return. The deal we struck was strictly maintained. I called Benjamin every Sunday afternoon. He was safely relocated to a modest, secure apartment in the Wicker Park neighborhood, working as a junior mechanic at a legitimate high-end garage, financed entirely by Rossi shell companies. He thought I had landed an executive assistant job for a tech billionaire that required strict non-disclosure agreements. He knew absolutely nothing of the blood money, the Mafia politics, or the biological trade funding his newfound peace. Dominic Rossi was a profound enigma. The ruthless, cold-blooded mob boss the city feared vanished the moment the reinforced steel doors of the penthouse locked behind him. The hyperreactive frenzy he had confessed to was not a myth or an exaggeration. I witnessed its terrifying reality on my fourth day in the gilded cage. He had returned from a tense, hostile sit-down with the Ukrainian Bratva near the Navy Pier, his pupils blown wide, swallowing his irises. His skin was flushed with a dangerous, feverish heat, and he was literally growling at the shadows in the hallway. The sheer, violent gravity of his presence shattered 3 delicate crystal whiskey glasses on the bar, just from the heavy acoustic resonance of his frustrated roar. I had been utterly terrified, pressing my back flat against the cold marble of the kitchen island, praying I would merge with the stone. But when his feral, gold-rimmed eyes locked onto me, the unhinged violence shifted into a desperate, agonizing need. He had crossed the room in a blur, collapsing to his knees before me, burying his face directly into my neck. His hot, jagged breath grazed my scent gland. The exact moment my cedar and vanilla pheromones washed over his system, his rigid muscles uncoiled. The predatory beast receded into the depths, leaving behind an exhausted, emotionally broken man clinging to my waist like a drowning sailor to a piece of driftwood. "You save me," he whispered that night, his voice a hoarse, ragged scrape. his massive arms wrapped securely around my body. Every single time, Oliver, you pull me back from the edge of the abyss. Slowly, the dynamic between us shifted. I stopped flinching instinctively when he reached out to touch my arm or brush hair from my eyes. We shared quiet, extravagant dinners ordered privately from a Linnea, or massive steaks delivered from Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, sitting across from each other, not as a powerful captor and a helpless captive, but as two distinct individuals bound by a brutal, inescapable biological contract. I began to see the sharp, calculating intellect behind the violence, the heavy, suffocating burden of the Rossi legacy that he carried on his broad shoulders. I was no longer just an anchor to keep him sane. I was slowly becoming his confidant, his sole sanctuary in a world built on treachery. But peace in the criminal underworld is merely an illusion, a brief, shallow inhale before the inevitable bleeding begins all over again. The betrayal did not come from a rival cartel. It came from inside the house. Matteo. Matteo had been Dominic's trusted right-hand man for over a decade. I had always noticed the subtle, disdainful curl of his lip whenever he looked at me, the bitter disgust radiating from his beta scent. To the traditional old guard of the Mafia, an Omega was an inherent weakness, a fragile pet meant to be kept hidden. A powerful Mafia don relying on an Omega for his sanity and survival was viewed as a critical liability, a fatal flaw that threatened the stability and reputation of the entire syndicate. The treason unfolded on a miserable rainy Thursday night in late October. Dominic was in the middle of a severe neurological episode, the absolute worst I had ever witnessed. A massive shipment of untraceable weapons had been seized by federal agents at O'Hare International Airport, and the resulting financial and logistical stress had triggered a massive biological spike. He was lying flat on the crushed velvet sofa, his face pressed so deeply into my throat I could feel his teeth against my pulse. His large hands were gripping my hips so tightly I knew it would leave deep purple bruises by morning. My fingers were desperately tangled in his thick, dark hair, manually massaging his scalp while releasing steady, concentrated waves of calming pheromones, murmuring quiet, meaningless reassurances into his ear. Then, the private biometric elevator chimed. Dominic's head snapped up instantly, a terrifying feral snarl ripping from deep within his chest. Nobody, absolutely nobody, was allowed on this secure floor without his explicit verbal clearance, especially when he was in a vulnerable state of frenzy. The heavy steel doors slid open, revealing Matteo. But he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 6 heavily armed tactical mercenaries I didn't recognize. They weren't wearing the sharp suits of Rossi men. They wore the dark tactical gear and carried the aggressive insignias of the Navarro cartel. Hector Navarro himself casually walked in. Behind them, a smug, venomous smile stretching across his deeply scarred, bloated face. "Well, look at this pathetic display," Hector sneered, stepping confidently onto the priceless Persian rug, his boots tracking the mud. The great untouchable Dominic Rossi, reduced to a whimpering, pathetic dog sniffing an Omega's neck. Matteo told me it was embarrassing, but seeing it with my own eyes is truly a religious experience. Dominic forcefully pushed me behind him, his massive, imposing frame shielding me entirely from their line of sight. The biological frenzy he had been aggressively fighting suddenly weaponized. The deep-seated protective alpha instincts violently collided with his neurological overdrive. His eyes rapidly bled from their natural dark brown to a pure, glowing, predatory amber. Matteo. Dominic's voice wasn't human. It was a demonic, rattling rumble that vibrated through the hardwood floorboards and shook my bones. "You brought filthy dogs into my personal home." Matteo took a cautious step back, raising his customized Glock 19, his hands visibly trembling, despite his overwhelming numerical and tactical advantage. "You're sick, boss. You're chemically compromised. This family cannot be led by a Don chained to an Omega's scent gland. It makes us look weak. I made a strategic deal with Hector to merge the territories and share the ports. It's strictly business. You die here tonight, and the boy, Hector takes the pretty boy to settle the old debts he owes." Hector licked his dry lips, his dark, cruel eyes raking over my partially concealed body with a sickening, predatory hunger. "I promise I'll make sure your little brother Benjamin gets a front row seat to the entertainment, Oliver." The casual mention of Benjamin's name was the final fatal spark that ignited the Rossi powder keg. Absolute chaos erupted, with deafening, earth-shattering violence. Dominic did not bother reaching for the concealed weapon at his waist. He physically became the weapon. The chemical frenzy granted him terrifying, unnatural speed and absolute pain suppression. He lunged forward with explosive force before Matteo could even pull the trigger, closing the 20-foot distance in a terrifying blur of charcoal fabric and raw, unadulterated muscle. He hit Matteo with the unstoppable kinetic force of a freight train, driving the traitorous underboss directly backward through the thick, reinforced glass of the modern coffee table. Gunfire immediately exploded in the confined space, the deafening cracks shattering the remaining panoramic windows. Freezing torrential rain and the howling, bitter Chicago wind violently ripped into the luxurious penthouse, tearing down expensive drapery and sending paperwork flying like macabre confetti. I scrambled frantically behind the solid marble kitchen island, covering my ears tightly as rogue bullets tore through expensive drywall and instantly destroyed priceless curated artwork. I cautiously peeked around the cold marble corner, my breath catching painfully in my dry throat at the carnage unfolding. It was a complete massacre. Dominic was actively taking bullets, but he did not even flinch. I saw bright crimson blossoming rapidly on his left shoulder and tearing through the fabric at his side. It was as if he could not register the trauma. He flawlessly disarmed a heavily armored Navarro mercenary, snapping the man's wrist with a sickening, audible crunch, and seamlessly used the dying man's own assault rifle to ruthlessly mow down two others. He moved through the crossfire with a brutal, terrifying mechanical efficiency that was bizarrely beautiful in its absolute, unyielding horror. Hector Navarro, suddenly realizing the colossal, fatal magnitude of his miscalculation, turned his massive body to flee desperately toward the open elevator doors. "No!" Dominic roared, vaulting flawlessly over a fallen, bullet-riddled sofa. He aggressively tackled the fleeing cartel boss to the hardwood floor, his massive, blood-slicked hands wrapping tightly around Hector's thick, sweaty neck. The chemical frenzy was actively consuming him entirely now. He was going to squeeze and crush until Hector's head physically detached from his spine. "Dominic, stop!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, the desperate sound tearing raw from my throat over the wail of the stormy wind and the groans of dying men. He didn't hear me. His conscious mind was entirely gone, swallowed whole in the suffocating red tide of the biological overdrive. If he killed Hector right now, in this state of absolute peak fury, his brain would inevitably hemorrhage. The biological failsafe would trigger a massive, fatal stroke. I knew this terrifying medical reality. He had explained the grim medical prognosis of his condition weeks ago. I did not stop to think about the danger, the bullets, or the blood. I just ran. I sprinted frantically across the ruined, debris-covered living room, slipping dangerously on slick blood and shattered, jagged glass. I threw my entire body weight onto Dominic's broad back, wrapping my arms as tightly as humanly possible around his heaving, tense shoulders. "Dominic, please look at me," I begged loudly, purposefully, burying my face deep into the sweaty crook of his neck, actively overriding my own natural biological dampers. I flooded the humid metallic air with the purest, most highly concentrated burst of my soothing pheromones I could possibly muster. The heavy, sweet scent of rain and rich vanilla hit the bloody gunpowder-choked air like a precise, tactical strike. "Come back to me, Dominic," I pleaded, pressing my trembling lips directly against the rapid, wildly thrumming pulse at his sharp jawline. "I am right here. I am safe. I need you to stop this right now." For one agonizing, terrifying second, absolutely nothing happened. His ironclad grip on Hector's throat remained unyielding. Hector's bloated face was turning a horrifying shade of dark purple, his bloodshot eyes rolling back into his skull. And then suddenly, a violent full-body shudder racked Dominic's massive, tense frame. He gasped loudly, instantly, dropping Hector's neck as if the man were made of burning acid. He turned sharply, pulling my body off his back and immediately crushing me flush against his broad, bleeding chest. He buried his face aggressively into my scent gland, inhaling my pheromones in huge, desperate, ragged gasps. The terrifying, inhuman growl vibrating in his chest slowly, painfully dissolved into a broken, exhausted, heavily labored sob. The glowing predatory gold in his dilated eyes slowly faded back to the familiar, exhausted dark brown I had come to recognize. The remaining conscious mercenaries, witnessing their boss choking violently on the floor, immediately dropped their weapons in sheer terror and sprinted frantically for the emergency stairwell. We stayed huddled together on the ruined floor amidst the heavy, smoking grey wreckage. Did you enjoy this thrilling Omegaverse Mafia romance? The world of alphas and omegas is full of danger, undeniable chemistry, and shocking plot twists. If Oliver and Dominic's intense journey kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow drama lovers who crave dark romance. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking, real-life inspired storytelling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an update.